Okay, students. So we are talking about the characteristics of developed countries, and we have learned about the characteristics of least developed countries. Now it's time for the characteristics of developing countries. So far we have learned about the definition and more or less about the developing countries. Here you can see the characteristics of developing countries. There are already 10 characteristics mentioned here in your textbook. These are agro-based economy, per capita income, incomplete utilization of natural resources, there are shortage of capital, primary goods and primary goods producing country. The developing countries are a producer of primary goods. Development of industries, deficit in foreign trade, lack of entrepreneur, weak economic infrastructure, and dependence on foreign aid. These 10 are the characteristics of developing countries. So let's start with the first one, agro-based economy. What does it mean? Here in agro-based economy, most of the people are directly, indirectly related or dependent on agriculture, and a high part of labor is a remarkable part of labor force is engaged in agriculture. And in agriculture, primitive methods are used in small farms. So the development of modern technology is noticed here also, but not at a large scale. There is always a natural disaster like flood and drought. They can protect themselves from the natural calamity. They can protect their crops from the natural calamity using the modern technology. Using their traditional and primitive method, they are producing in agriculture. Their economy is based on agriculture, and a high the number of people are engaged directly or indirectly in agricultural sector. Okay, so the developing countries' economy is based on agriculture, and here per capita income. Per capita income in developing countries is lower than the developed countries, but more than the less developed countries. So the standard of living is not so high and not so poor. It is almost in low middle income countries. They can be called the middle income countries. Their per capita income will be a lower middle level, not so low or not so high like developed countries, and their purchasing power and the standard of living is also in medium sector. Okay, so here in third topic, incomplete utilization of natural resources. In developed countries, they are efficient in utilization of natural resources. In less developed countries, they are not at all efficient in using the natural resources. And in developing countries, what happens? The utilization is incomplete. Though most of the developing countries have a lot of natural resources, but they are not being completely utilized. They are not being completely utilized, and you will know the reason that they will have a medium level of education and medium level of technological advancement and medium level of skilled worker. So all of their process will be incomplete. They will not reach the target of proper utilization. Okay, so there is incomplete utilization of natural resources. And here, number 4, that is shortage of capital. Per capita income in developing countries is low. Per capita in developing countries is low, so obviously the savings will be low, and when the low savings are there, they will create problem in the formation of capital. It's a common and general scenario. When the income is low, the savings will be low, and these will create the problem of shortage of capital. Okay. And what happens here? Primary goods producing country. So the developing countries are the produce of primary goods, and they use labor intensive technology. Labor intensive technologies. And primary goods means the raw materials for any industry. We know that developing countries are based on agriculture. Developing countries' economy is based on agriculture. They are the industry sector. The industry sectors are dependent on agricultural sector, and the primary raw materials like jute, leather, sugarcane. Okay, these comes from the agricultural sector, and developing countries are producer of this kind of primary raw materials or primary goods. Okay, and they use labor intensive method to produce these goods. Okay, here in characteristics number 6, development of industries. Okay, in the developing countries, industries are in the primary phase, but the development of export-based labor-intensive industries are noticed in some places, and that's the reason they are developing. That's the reason of their growth. Okay, there are some export-based labor-intensive industries, and these are the reason for the developing countries, which are helping them to achieve the economic growth. Can you give an example of this kind of industry? Yes, the RMG sector. They are export-based, labor-intensive industry. Okay, and this is the main character. This is a what will I say? Prominent characteristics of developing countries, that they have some developed industry. They are labor-intensive and export-based. Okay, so here characteristic number 7, there are deficit in foreign trade. Okay, every year in developing countries, import expenditure exceeds the export earnings, always, because they are not so good at, they are not at all fulfilled or completely successful in manufacturing industry. Okay, they are not at all fulfilled. They can't fulfill their demand from their own manufacturing industry or manufactured goods. So every year they have to import more goods than the exported goods. They export the raw materials of agricultural sector, which is low in price, and they have to import the produced goods that always exceeds the earning, and that's why the countries have to face trade deficit every year, always. And the number of products they export is less than the number of product they import. So there is always a high ratio of export and import. The difference is high, and this creates the deficit, trade deficits every year. Okay, and problem characteristics number 8, they lack entrepreneur. Why they lack entrepreneur? Because most of the products in developing countries are from agriculture. Most of the products in developing countries are agriculture. So where were we? We were talking about the lack of entrepreneur. And most of the products in developing countries are from agriculture. And in agricultural sector, there is an instability of price. Price is not at all stable, and so it creates risk for the investor. Whenever there is price fluctuation, sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher. You can see the price of for example, you can see the price of fish and vegetables in our national or local market. It is always, sometimes it's very cheaper, sometimes it's very expensive. And this is a small scenario of a market, and this creates a huge risk for investors. and as a result, the development is hampered due to the lack of domestic and foreign entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are at risk. Entrepreneurs are afraid to invest in such an unstable business. Okay, so in developing countries, there are lack of entrepreneur, local entrepreneur, or maybe a foreign entrepreneur because of the instability of the prices of goods. Okay, and here characteristics number 8: weak and economic infrastructure. Weak economic infrastructure like communication and transport system, electricity, banking, insurance, etc. are insufficient. And for this insufficient infrastructure system, there are always a huge production cost. They are related to huge production cost, and that will result to lower productivity, low production. So in developing countries, there are weak economic infrastructure in communication, transport, electricity, utility, or banking and insurance sectors also. Okay, and for these countries tend to take the foreign aid. They are not they can't cover all of their expenses with their own savings or capital of the country, so they will look for foreign aid and they will depend on foreign aid. The last one, the infrastructural development of developing countries depends mostly on foreign aids. Okay, so these 10 are the characteristics of developing countries. Hope you have understood it well. And students, remember, whenever we are talking about the characteristics of developed countries and less developed countries and developing countries, they are more or less similar. In developed countries, they are at high pace, they are highly developed. In less developed countries, there are negative impacts on these characteristics, and in developing countries, they are in a lower middle level. Okay, all of these points are more or less similar. The points are almost similar for every type of countries, but the level of the development is lower middle in developing countries, less in less developed countries, and high in developed countries. So don't worry, just keep in mind what happens after one, and everything is related to one another. I have shown in the graphs or cycles, everything is related to one another, and that happens in the sector of development and economic growth. So keep calm and think carefully what happens in these characteristics. Okay, so let's go for another topic.